with the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. And they emphasized at that time mostly the Old Testament Torah, the Pentateuch, as we call it, the first 5 books of Moses. And all 5 are cited in Ezra and Nehemiah, as well as some of the prophets.
Let's focus on the canon of the Old Testament. When did that process begin? What happened in the years that followed?
Well, the Old Testament began as a process, and no one was thinking of a biblical canon when the process began. Essentially, the prophets are talking about the wilderness wanderings, but it starts with Egypt and their getting out of Egypt, and the children of Israel going through the wilderness and then entering into the promised land. Later on, that was expanded to tell the story of Sinai, the giving of the law. And the prophets, there's over 80 references. A friend of mine, a colleague that helped write the Canon Debate volume, or put it together, James Sanders, has more than 80 references to those events, and they became primary. Amos, for example, in chapter 2, speaks about the the Exodus as well as the wanderings and how God cared for the people. And the point was, if God cared for you, shouldn't you be living more in honor of God and not going after false gods? And those notions became much more prominent as the classical prophets, Amos and Isaiah and Hosea and so on, continued on. And it eventually became a collection of writings, but not for quite some time. And even the law itself was lost for quite some period of time and rediscovered by Josiah. His high priest Hilkiah found a copy of the law, probably the book of Deuteronomy, in the temple when they were doing some cleaning out and getting things squared away in the temple. He found the book, gave it to Josiah, and there was a marvelous turnaround. It was a time of renewal for the nation. They got away from it, and then there was a deportation, the destruction of Jerusalem, deportation. And when Ezra and Nehemiah come back to the land, they are reading the same book. And when the nation had been destroyed, its kingdom had been destroyed, its kings had been taken into captivity. What did the people have left when they had no city, no law, nothing that was giving them guidance? It was their scriptures. And Sanders has written on that extensively. And that's when you find the beginnings of Judaism as what we now have it with the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. And they emphasized at that time mostly the Old Testament Torah, the Pentateuch, as we call it, the first 5 books of Moses. And all 5 are cited in Ezra and Nehemiah, as well as some of the prophets.
So, all right, so when we come to the first century in the time of Jesus, was there an Old Testament canon then? Had it been finalized?
No, but there's quite a few people that have tried to make that argument. And we have no example of any listing of books and saying these are in and those are out until the end of the 2nd century for the Jews. And that was not until much later for the Christians. The Jews, the rabbinic sages, made a collection. It's now called a baraita, means something external. It wasn't included in the Mishnah, but it's a text that clarifies which books were recognized as sacred scripture for the Jews. The Christians didn't have that until the 4th century in the same collection, though there's one example, Melito of Sardis. He was a bishop of the church at Sardis, and he didn't know when he was asked which books are we to recognize as our scriptures. So he made a special trip from Sardis all the way to Jerusalem, Palestine, to find out what books were in. And he has everything except the book of Esther in his collection. But that doesn't tell us what all of the churches were thinking at that time. If the bishop of a church, a significant church in Sardis, didn't know, And there was one of the largest Jewish synagogues in the antiquity was right in Sardis. He could have walked across the street and said, hey, what books are in and what books are out? And he couldn't find out the answer to his friend's question without making the trip. And so that's the first time we see any listing of books.